Hi, this begins my presentation for the background culture on the Epistle of Paul to Philemon. Philemon is the recipient of this letter and was a prominent member of the church at Colossus. Um, to look at the author itself was Paul. And this book, Philemon, is one of the prison epistles, along with Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. Paul wrote these letters while he was in a Roman jail. Just to talk a little bit about the background and the setting, Philemon had been saved under Paul's ministry, probably at Ephesus during the early years. Philemon was a wealthy individual. He was wealthy enough to have a large house. And also, Philemon in those days owned at least one slave. And the slave's name was a man by the name of Onesimus. Uh, this was normally a common name used for slaves. And at this time, Onesimus was not a believer at the time. He had stole money from Philemon. Um, Onesimus ended up running away from Philemon to go to Rome, where most uh, slaves eventually ended up leaving their slave masters and going to Rome. This going back to the ancient homes. This house here is a home, and it could be similar to that which Philemon owned. But anyway, it you can see in the house there they had a place where the slaves reside, where they worshipped, bedrooms, kitchen, and storage rooms were in this home, and many people would come to this home. This is a map of the area, uh, Colossians, Ephesians, uh, where generally Paul had done a lot of his missionary work at, and we can see that the travel that was involved and the mountainous ranges that they had to go through. At the time of the writing of this book, we see that Paul is actually in Rome, um, down in number two, 3 and 2, where he's in Rome, and this is where they're going to send. Paul is going to send Onesimus back um, to Philemon, and because of what Onesimus had done, which was stealing money, which was not a good thing to have happen. Um, there is a historical and theological theme uh, that Paul provides here. And one of the things is, before we talk about that, was that I want to talk a little bit about the slavery. It was widespread in Rome, in the Roman Empire. According to some estimates, slave constituted 1/3, perhaps more, of the population, and was an accepted part of life. In Paul's day, slavery was virtually eclipsed. It eclipsed free labor. Slaves could be doctors, musicians, teachers, artists, librarians, or accountants. Slaves were looked at as not uh, legally considered people. Um, the masters would virtually ultimately use power to punish them, and sometimes for the slightest infractions. But one of the theological themes is in this letter is that Paul writes is about forgiveness. Over in Philemon, I believe in verse 16, he sends a letter back asking Philemon, he says, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, but how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord. Paul wants Philemon to receive onip, you know what I'm talking about. Wanted him to receive him back as a brother and no longer as a slave. And I think that theme is vivid and live in our day to day. This theme on forgiveness, and we need to show and share a lot more forgiveness. in our Christian walks and lives today. This concludes my short presentation. Take care. Have a great weekend.